Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Adapting to Teaching Online, Exploring Activities and Techniques to Engage Primary and Lower Secondary Learners. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Laura Rogers from Cambridge University Press and I'll be hosting this webinar for our speaker Ceri Jones. We are running these webinars to support you and your students whilst you continue to adapt to a new way of teaching and learning. Today, our focus is on how to adapt activities for teaching online in order to engage more learners. Before I run through an overview of today's webinar about what Ceri will be covering today, let me tell you about the webinar itself. We are recording the webinar to share with you afterwards, so do not worry if your internet drops out during the webinar or you feel that you need to cover some of the content again. If you're having trouble with your speakers, we suggest using headphones or checking that your speaker is not on mute. Your microphones will also be muted automatically throughout the webinar. Throughout the webinar, Ceri may ask you to interact with her and your fellow participants at different points. Please use the chat function for this interaction. I think many of you have found that function already, which is brilliant. Please also use the chat function for any technical issues. My colleagues Tamsin and Emma are both on hand and will be able to answer any questions that they can. If you have any questions for Ceri about the topics covered in the webinar, please put these in the Q&A as we will be taking questions from here at the end. We will also be running a couple of polls today, so we'll make sure that you're aware of when these are running so that you can take part. We will also be sending a follow-up email within the next 7 days after this live event. The email will contain a link to the recording of the webinar, links to other useful resources, and a link to our webinar feedback form. So to generate your certificate of attendance, please submit your name and email address in the feedback form. And then a digital certificate will be automatically emailed to you. If you do not receive this, please check your junk folder or check that you've inputted your email address correctly by trying again. Now, before we start, I would like to give you a quick overview of the webinar. We understand that it is not easy to deliver classroom activities in a digital environment, especially when you have had to adapt so quickly. In this webinar, we will explore activities and techniques you can use when delivering lessons online. Ceri will talk to us about whole class activities, independent learning, and offer advice on how we can monitor progress and meet learning objectives online. Ceri will also suggest various teaching and learning tools, such as using voice recordings, videos, and worksheets. We will look at how to prepare for new changes and how we can use online learning to encourage young learners to develop 21st century skills. I will shortly be handing over to Ceri Jones. Ceri is a teacher, trainer, and materials writer based in Spain. She is part of the author team for multiple Cambridge titles, including Eyes Open and Evolve. Ceri is also an online tutor for the Consultants E. That's all from me for now. Thank you very much again for joining the webinar today. I will join you again for the Q&A at the end. So now I'm going to hand over to Ceri. Ceri, if you would like to share your screen with us, please.
Yes, just a second. Laura, you may need to give me permission.
Okay. Let me do that now. Okay, are you able to share now?
Just a second. No, not yet.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I've allowed sharing and I'm...
Yes, it's working.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay, you should be able to see my screen now, is that right? Yeah. Hi everyone, how are you doing? It's lovely to be here, lovely to be speaking to you all. Chat box that you can see the presentation. that you can see the first slide, that would be wonderful. Okay. So thank you very much, Laura. And as Laura said, what we're going to be looking at really is very much the hands-on side of teaching online, both live online as we are now, and encouraging students to use online platforms when they're away from the classroom as well. So probably the most important thing to say right at the beginning is that context is the key to absolutely everything. And so before we go any further, I'd like to find out a little bit more about your context. Okay, so we're going to start with some introductions that we're going to do through some polls. After that, we're going to quickly look at the question of what is online learning and teaching, and then distinguishing between working together at the same time or students working in their own time. We'll cover how objectives and competencies, both online and off. And finally, we'll look at the difference between blending and flipping in an online classroom. Okay, so first of all, let's go back to introductions. Okay, Laura is going to share some polls with you now on the screen. Could you please fill them in as you see them coming up on your screen?
Just launched the first one and I'm seeing lots of votes coming in.
Wonderful.
Which is brilliant. Just give that one a few more seconds.
Okay, so just to answer that question myself, it is mid-morning here in the south of Spain, which is where I'm based. And I'm looking forward to seeing where everybody else is when we finish the poll.
Numbers are still going up rapidly, so I'm just going to give it a few more.
Yeah. Well, online polls are incredibly easy to add to your classrooms. It can be one of the really useful features for getting all of your students interacting at the same time as you're doing now. And you'll see in a minute that you can share the results on the screen as well. And it's a great way to kick off a classroom discussion, for example, or maybe to review the grammar from the lesson, or to do a quick test. They're incredibly easy to add to your online classroom and very, very versatile. Okay, so for most people, it's the afternoon. Okay, lovely. A couple of people at night and in the evening. So morning, lunchtime, and afternoon. Okay, so that kind of gives us an idea where we all are, more or less. Could you launch the second poll, please, Laura?
Yes. Second poll is launched.
Lovely. So just to answer this question for myself, here in Spain, the school year has just finished or is just finishing. All schools closed physically in March, and there has been no return to schools, but the students in the last year of high school are preparing for their university entrance exams next week, which they will be doing in a physical classroom. So that's where we're at.
Okay, I'm going to share the results of this one now.
Lovely. I can see.
But, the majority have come through as just starting.
Yes.
So that's 42%. and then just slightly less on the just finishing, and again, slightly less on about halfway through.
Okay. Okay, so that's interesting that there's quite a balance there then of different points in the year, and the just starting and the just finishing in a way are quite similar, because the people who are just finishing are obviously going to be thinking about restarting as well. So hopefully we'll be able to show activities throughout the webinar that are useful for everybody, whether you're starting or finishing or halfway through. Okay, we have one more poll for you. Thanks, Laura.
This one's going up very fast as well. Lots of votes coming in. Just give that a few more seconds.
Okay, in this case, you can tick more than one box in the poll, of course, and I'm imagining that we're going to have high numbers in all of the age groups. But also, as we go through the webinar, we're going to be thinking about the different challenges for the different age groups, because it isn't the same. Obviously, we have a different approach depending on the age of our students.
Okay, we've got 80%, so I'm going to share that now.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you see the results?
Not yet, but I think they're just taking a little bit of time to come onto the screen.
Okay, so we've got exactly the same percent on ages 8 to 10 and 11 to 13, which is 36%.
Yeah.
And then we've got slightly less at 28% on 5 to 7, so the younger age group, and then also 26% on other.
Oh, wow. So we've got a spread across everything, basically. Okay.
Yeah, good
Lovely.
spread.
Okay, fantastic. So there we have our various contexts. So it's just to point out this fact that really this is something that people are tackling. This is a challenge that we're facing across all kinds of classrooms. And it's one that obviously we've already had quite a lot of experience of. And so as we move on, we're delving in just a little bit more deeply into the opportunities of an online classroom. Okay, so let's have a look then at our first question. Okay. So what is online teaching exactly? In the chat box, could you write a very short definition for you of what you think online teaching is? Okay, I can see some new messages coming into the chat here. Okay, I don't see any definitions yet. So here are some suggestions for you. Online teaching is basically a blend of whatever we've got and whatever instruments we have to hand, whatever tools, and it can be a mixture of any of the following. So you might have live online classes, similar to our webinar at the moment. You might have some digital communication channels, such as email. You might have a platform that your school shares with the students. You might have a shared online space like Google Platform, for example, Google Classroom, sorry, for example. You may ask students to share documents. You may share documents with your students. You might use video recordings. You might use photos. And also you might be using forums or chats. or other meetings that aren't actually video conferencing. There's all kinds of different aspects, different sides to online teaching and learning. And of course, for most of us, when the teaching is online, we're at home. We are, and our students are as well. And this is a context that we need to remember in our lessons and to bring in as much as we can. Okay, so let's have a look at the opportunities and the affordances of online teaching. So the opportunities, students can talk to their teacher, even if they're not in the same room as their teacher. This doesn't mean that they can't have contact with their teacher. They can talk to their teacher in an online class like this now, but they can also talk to their teacher one-to-one. It could be through a phone call. It might be through an email. It might be through a video recording that the teacher shares with the class. For younger students, so we're looking at that younger age group, 5 to 7 or even younger, we probably want to use the parents as well as a channel of communication. So the students can talk to their teacher with their parents or through their parents. And we'll come back to this again, but the importance of parents with younger learners, really, they are our partners in this online teaching world. And I think that we've all learned to work much, much more closely together. I also think that families, parents, students have all come to value the presence of the teacher so much more during school closure, because it's given everybody a sense of routine, a sense of normality, a sense of a social contact with the other classmates. And so really, I mean, I just want to say now a huge thank you to teachers all over the world who've been keeping things as normal as possible for their students. So talking to the teacher is still really one of the most important things of online teaching. Secondly, students, of course, can work not only with the teacher, but with their classmates. And for a lot of the younger learners, here I'm thinking of primary, lower primary, upper primary as well, the idea of meeting their classmates online is exciting. I heard of students who were logging in early so that they could see their classmates and chat to them before the lesson started when the teacher allowed that. So working online with their classmates is important not only educationally but socially, and this whole idea of the group. They're missing their classmates. They want to be together in a room. So being together in a virtual room is is the best they can get when the schools are closed. So they can work with their classmates in the live lesson, of course, but also you can set up activities so that students are working with their classmates outside. They may be sending each other messages. They may even meet the older students. I'm thinking of maybe lower secondary. They may actually be able to hold their own live meetings to do group work, for example. Of course, a lot of work is also being done on their own, because the contact hours, generally speaking, when we move to teaching online, the contact hours, the actual hours we spend together tend to be reduced. And we are asking students to do more work on their own. Of course, this has its advantages, because that means that students can work at their own pace. If it's a reading text, for example, different students read at different speeds. And if they're working on their own, they can do it in the time they need. Some students need more time to process whatever content it is you're teaching, whether it's grammar, whether it's science. Students need more time. Some students need more time, and they get this time when they're working on their own. Of course, talking again about those younger learners, we need the parents to be there with them to help them to work on their own, just as we need the parents to be there with them to help them access the online classroom. So with the younger age group, our parents really are almost like classroom assistants, and we need to make sure that we're addressing their needs as well as the students' needs, and that we're communicating with them. So, and this is actually a very positive thing, because that means that students are working with their parents, and the parents are getting to know more and more about what their students are doing through their work. So students can ask questions and they can get feedback. This again can happen in the online classrooms, or it can take place one-to-one through emails, as we said before. All of these things are possible. Okay, so last of all, create, collaborate, and communicate. These are things that we can do through all of the various different stages of the lesson. We can ask students to create things when they're working on their own. We can ask them to work together, whether it's in the live classroom or whether it's in groups outside the classroom or with their parents. And all the time, what we want them to do when we're in our live classrooms, whether we're emailing them, is to communicate. It's really important to keep communication as open as possible between teachers and students, students and students, parents and students. All of these things are really important. Okay, just a second. There seems to possibly be a problem with the PowerPoint. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint again? I'm sorry, that disappeared for a moment. Yeah, is everyone okay again with the PowerPoint?
Hi, Ceri, this is Tamsin. Yes, we can see the PowerPoint.
Lovely, thank you, Tamsin. I don't know what happened there, it disappeared. I'm very sorry, apologies to everyone. Okay, so as you can see then, there are so many different aspects, so many different advantages that we can use here, so many affordances when we're teaching online. So the fact that we can't be together in a physical classroom doesn't mean that we can't actually be working together almost as closely as when we're face to face. Okay, now we're going to have a quick look at the difference between synchronous and asynchronous working online. Now, these are the terms which are used for synchronously means everybody's working at the same time together. And asynchronously means everyone's working at their own pace, at their own time.
Ceri, can we pause for one moment? Sorry, it's Tamsin again. We're getting a lot of messages through saying they're not able to see your screen at the moment. I think we just need to wait for them to load. Could we try
yes, okay.
sharing the screen again? Brilliant. That's come back for me.
Okay.
I can see the screen too.
Let's wait just a few seconds so the screen pops up for everyone else as well.
Wonderful. We're getting some people saying they can see.
This is one of the problems of an online classroom as well with your students. Quite often you have to wait until everyone has the slides up when you're sharing your screen. In the meantime, I'm guessing that everyone can hear me. So we'll talk about this idea of synchronous work and this idea of we're all working at the same time. And this is an important aspect of online learning because this is where we feel a sense of community, of collaboration. And this is when we can interact together and communicate. We can get students speaking in an English classroom. The online lessons are so important from the point of view of communication, speaking activities, activating the language, but also in any other lesson as well, activating contents. This is probably the most important aspect of the synchronous lesson. So when we're working synchronously, we're all working at the same time, and we're all working in the same place. Now, that could be an online classroom, similar to our webinar setup here, or it could be a text chat. Now, this may seem a little old-fashioned, but if you are working somewhere where there are bandwidth problems, then sharing a video, sharing slides, as we've seen, can be problematic. So actually, sometimes a simple text chat can work really well. This might even be on a mobile phone app. This obviously depends on the age of the students that you're working with. This doesn't work with the younger learners, or it would work with their parents, but it does work with upper primary and lower secondary if they have the possibility, maybe through their parents' phones, to enter in a chat. It could be through a shared document. This could be, for example, a Google Word document or a Google Jamboard, where all of the students are accessing the same document online at the same time and are all able to contribute and collaborate in that document. Synchronous activities can take place with the teacher, and we generally think about these activities taking place with a teacher because if we think about the live classroom as the synchronous meeting point. But it can also, as I've previously mentioned, take place in a group. So you could create work groups for students where they come together, especially again, we're talking about the older students here. They might meet in a Zoom room or in a Google Hangout or in any other online space and work together to complete a task. So all of this is when more than one person is meeting to work together. So it could be the whole class, or it could be pairs, or it could be groups. Okay, now let's have a look at what asynchronous work is. So asynchronously means that everyone is working in their own time. And again, let's go back. I'd like to really highlight the importance of in your own time means giving each student the chance to work when they want, when they can, at their own pace. It means that parents for younger learners can choose when to do this work. They may be trying to juggle working at home or out of the home with working with their kids. And so it's important that a large chunk of the work that students are doing, they're actually doing in their own time. It can be on a computer, it can be on a phone, it can be on paper, it can be on your own, it can be with a parent, or it can be with a group. Asynchronous work with a group means that each person in the group is working on on their part of the job, and then they'll share it together, bring it together. Maybe it's a project, each person in the group is doing something different, and then they finally bring together their images, their texts, their recordings to create a whole group project. So obviously in any online teaching, we are balancing these two things. And this really is the key. It's striking the right balance. And for each classroom, for each school, for each context, even for each student, that balance is going to be slightly different. And I think also we need to share this with our students to tell them that we know that each one of them is balancing things differently and to allow for this as well. Okay, so we've dealt with synchronous and asynchronous. Now we're going to have a look, dig a little bit more deeply into what we're actually doing in the classroom, what we can do in the classroom. First, we're going to look at some general teaching objectives. Okay, things that we as teachers do with our classes. So, presenting, we present new content, we present new language items, we present new skills or new aspects of skills. Processing, we ask our students to work with this new content, to process the new content, to understand it, usually through some activities, exercises, maybe answering questions from the teacher, maybe completing a simple task. Practicing, of course, this is incredibly important in an English speaking classroom, really this is probably what we want to give most time to, most emphasis to, is getting the students using the language. So practicing, producing the language. And if it's a content subject, well, with maths, it's the same as with language, you're practicing the maths. With science, you're applying the information that you've learned, but also learning to communicate the knowledge that you've got. So I'd say that this is basically the bread and butter of our classroom: presenting, processing, practicing. And then, of course, as our students are learning, we are reviewing the content and language that they've learned previously. We're assessing their progress, assessing where they need more help, where they need more support, and lots of other things as well, of course. So these are our main teaching objectives. Let's see how these tie in with competencies. And the 4 C's of 21st century competencies in particular, not that these, of course, are only 21st century skills. These are competencies that have been important in education for centuries, I would say. In the chat box, could you share what you understand to be the 4 C's of 21st century competencies? Okay, so here they are. Critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. These are the 4 C's that we're doing with our students. So, critical thinking, where does this come in? Well, in the processing, for example. So, after we've presented new language or new information to our students, then we will ask the students to answer some critical thinking questions about that input. Now, where and when do we do this? Well, very often it's worth giving students plenty of time to process. So this aspect of critical thinking, you may want them to do it on their own. And then when you meet in the online classroom, you can check when all of the students have had a chance to process, they will all have an answer to share with you. So very often we will ask students to process new knowledge away from the live classroom. And in the live classroom, we'll make the most of the time to clarify, to check, to make sure that students are processing. Communication, this obviously ties in with the practicing. Practicing in English, the communication is obviously the key here, but in other contents too, you want the students to be able to communicate what they've learned. So we want to set up tasks in the online classroom where students are given a chance to speak and to communicate and to put into practice what they've learned. Reviewing is something that can take place away from the classroom and in the classroom as well. And in fact, it should. Students should be encouraged to do tasks that help them to review what they've seen in the online classroom. But also when we meet for the next lesson, we should always kick off the lesson with a short review exercise of some sort so that students can quickly remember what they did in the last lesson, and maybe using the chat box so that you get answers from everyone at the same time. This is a great way to start any lesson with a few quick review questions, or maybe a few polls like we started the webinar. Assessing. Okay, well, I think that creativity comes in here for everyone when we're talking about assessing. Creativity on the part of the teacher to create new ways of assessing, because the online classroom and online teaching does throw up a challenge with assessing. So if we can ask students to be creative in showing us their knowledge of the subject, then we can find ways where each student will be able to give their own individual answer to a test, and we can see that each student is processing that knowledge in their own way. This helps particularly with formative assessment. So when we're looking at how the students are doing, where they need more help, where they need more support. How can we do this? With younger learners, ask them to draw something and then explain their drawing, for example. With older learners, ask them to put together a simple, short presentation and then give the presentation to the class. One of the wonderful things about online classes is that we can record them, part of them or all of them, the video or only the audio, and we can use those as teachers to listen again and assess the students in our own time. This can be really useful. Or we can ask students to make their own recordings and share those with us. That's incredibly valuable for assessing spoken language, for example. So students make audio recordings or video recordings and they share those with the teacher. Looking back at collaboration as a very important 21st century skill, I think that online teaching has taught us all how to collaborate more. Our students are collaborating behind the scenes more than we can possibly imagine. They're helping each other with tasks, with exercises. They are working together. It comes naturally to them. And we can use this spirit of collaboration in the classroom and outside the classroom to encourage students to keep working together. It's very motivating if you're working with a classmate, because this really keeps the students on track when they feel that they need to do something for their classmates, not only for themselves. So very quickly, let's go back through the possible ways that we can present. So we can choose to present live in the classroom, which is very much mirroring the way we present in a face-to-face classroom, or we can choose to make our own video recordings and send those to the students so they can watch the presentation in their own time. This works incredibly well with younger learners if you want them to learn, for example, a song or to listen to a story. They can do that in their own time with their parents whenever suits them. So sending short video recordings to your class is actually incredibly effective. Processing these videos. This is where you can send homework for students to do online or offline. They can be working in their course books or they can be working in an online classroom. It doesn't matter, but the important thing is the critical thinking questions, asking students to engage with the presentation. Practicing. This is best done in the live classroom, okay? But you can still get students to practice individually, and using recordings in a language classroom is fantastic to ask them to record themselves speaking. But also, of course, they can send you written tasks for practice, or they can do the practice exercises from their books and check their answers themselves. And then you ask them to report back on any difficulties that they had. And this all ties in, of course, with reviewing and assessing. So let's move on to think about digital confidence and competence as an additional 21st century skill. So we're obviously primarily interested in making sure that we continue to teach our students as we did when we met face to face. But also, one of the huge opportunities that online teaching and learning is giving us is the ability to work with creating digital confidence and competence in our students. So making students feel comfortable in the online classroom. And one of the main keys to this is praise. Let our students understand that how happy we are with what they're doing, how much we appreciate their work, every little thing that they manage to do, we should really congratulate them and celebrate it. And this is how we build confidence and competence, through practice, through experimentation. Try new things, but only one little thing at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself or don't overwhelm your students. Just take little steps out of your comfort zone every now and then, and slowly but surely everyone is increasing their confidence. Okay, moving on to our final comparison and contrast, we're going to look at the ideas of blending and flipping. Okay, so blending, and here we have an image of a delicious smoothie being blended. Blended learning is that we take different ingredients, we bring them together to make something that works much, much better than the sum of all the parts. So we take an online classroom, we take the offline work, we take communication with the students and the parents, we balance it all, and we create the perfect blend for every classroom. So for example, with upper primary, the perfect blend could be asking students to study the grammar presentation outside the classroom, come to class ready to ask any questions, to clarify any doubts, and to put that learning into practice. In the classroom, the students will perform whole class activities, answering questions in the chat box. They'll use their mics to speak one at a time in the main classroom. You can set up pair work with two students talking to each other in the main classroom. You can send the students into breakout rooms to work in small groups. You can bring them back into the main classroom where they can report back on their task. You can ask the students to answer polls or to annotate your slides. You can keep the class varied and active with lots of different tasks. And then the students can go home, maybe prepare some kind of creative task to review what they did in the classroom, but also work on the next lesson. So this is blending what's happening in the class with what's happening at home. They prepare maybe a reading text that they need to look at for the next lesson at home in their own time, at their own pace. And then we come back into the live online classroom together, and the students discuss the text. They don't read the text in the online class, they've done that already. And this brings us to the idea of flipping. So blending is the idea of which ingredients do we want to use and what's the balance. Flipping is more the idea of what comes first and what comes after. So in a traditional classroom, we would maybe present the language or the content in the classroom, and the students would practice at home. Whereas in a flipped classroom, the students will study the content at home. So, for example, a short video of a grammar presentation, a short video of the content of a science lesson. And then in the lesson, they will practice what they learnt at home. So in that way, we're flipping the lesson. So the students do the presentation in their own time at home, and the teacher practices in the classroom. So we're using the live classroom for activation, communication, and interaction. And of course, we have all of the contrasts we've seen before in both blending and flipping. We have synchronous and asynchronous, collaborative work, independent work, presenting and practicing, processing and reviewing. And all of these things, of course, have to come together in the right balance. And that's how we produce the best possible course that we can for our students and our context using the ingredients that we've got. Now, looking forward to after school closures, maybe some of you are already in this situation where the blending and the flipping will actually be something that works with the physical classroom. So I know in some contexts already there has been talk of some students going back to the classroom and some staying at home, or half of the class coming at one time and the other half coming at another. Probably there will be reduced contact hours, probably there'll be reduced class sizes. And so all of this makes blending and flipping a perfect solution for this new normality that we'll be facing in the classroom, because we can make sure that the students, the work they're doing at home is supporting and complementing the work that they do in the classroom, and the other way around, of course. Okay, so we've come to the question and answer session. And Laura, could you please show the poll where you can all vote on your main concerns?
Yep, I've launched the poll now, so hopefully our participants can see that on their screens.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, I'm seeing a few votes coming in, so.
So let me take over here from Laura. So just to reiterate, technology, platforms and accessibility, 46%, managing a live lesson, 27%, balancing synchronous and asynchronous tasks, 28%, involving parents with younger learners, 26%, lack of engagement, motivation, confidence from 47%, and then other, we've got 4%.
Okay, lovely. So it looks like for the moment, technology and lack of engagement and so on, these are the two main areas of concern. So I think I'm going to start with the lack of engagement, motivation and confidence from learners. And I completely agree that this probably is, in fact, the two of them are the two main concerns that I've seen as well in classrooms. One of the things that we really have to remember as well is that in a situation of school closures, not all students have the same access to the teacher. So some students may not have the devices or the connectivity to attend live classrooms. They may need another approach. They will need maybe individual phone contact from the school, whether that's from the teacher or administration, and work sent to them that they can do in their print books. So there, obviously, engagement and motivation and confidence is really important. And the most important thing in all of these things is the teacher's presence. It's for the teacher to show how much they appreciate any effort on the part of the students. But if we look at the students who are able to connect, so the first basic problem is a technology problem for the students who aren't able to connect. So for them, we need to find a different way to do things, maybe even physically through letters. But for those students who are connecting, who are online, then engagement comes through the tasks that we design for our students. And the most important thing in these tasks is that we ask our students to do something. So not that they're simply watching us and listening to us, but they have to take part in the lesson. So simple activities, quick, simple activities in the chat box are perfect for upper primary and lower secondary. Physical response activities are perfect for everyone, but particularly for younger learners. So, for example, you're listening to a song together in an online classroom, and there are certain movements that the students have to make. The teacher will model the movements. to the camera, and the students will follow. And that in itself is motivating. But then if you ask them to make a video of themselves doing the same movements to share with you, the teacher, then that motivates them too. So sharing motivates, interacting together motivates. Confidence is making sure, for example, that you allow students time before you ask them to answer a question in the online classroom. Online classrooms can be more daunting than face-to-face classrooms. Our faces, if the students are accessing their cameras, are there on the screen close up for everyone to see. And this can make some students feel quite shy. So one of the ways around this is to use the camera so that students can show something to the camera rather than talk about themselves. They'll talk about something else. So you might choose a very simple object. I'm going to just pick one up from my desk and show you my green pen that I'm going to be using today to write my notes. Now that's a very, very simple example, but if you ask students to show something to the camera, the focus isn't on them anymore, it's on the object. So there are lots of little things that we can do to build students' confidence, to help them feel less shy when they're speaking in an online class.
And yeah, so just before we wrap up for the end of the webinar, I'd just like to mention our Teaching and Learning from Home resources page, where you can find further support. You will find some links here to our other webinars that we've run recently. Also our Teaching Remotely with Global English guide and our packs of free downloadable primary worksheets. These are all free to download. We're also still offering extended free trials of Digital Classroom, where you can access digital versions of our primary resources. So all links to these resources will be included in the follow-up email, which you will receive within the next 7 days. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, this will include useful links, the link to the webinar recording, and the link to our feedback form, which you can use to generate digital certificate of attendance. So I'm just going to check. We've got lots of great responses on the poll. So thank you so much for that. It really does help us to improve our webinars moving forwards. And lots of lovely thank you messages in the chat box as well.
Thank you to everyone for being here.
Yeah,
With so many messages in the chat box, I have to confess I haven't been able to follow it at all.
Yes, there's been lots and loads of amazing questions as well. Sorry that we won't be able to answer all of them live. It just wouldn't be possible with the amount of questions. But we will be going through them and collating kind of the common themes and then putting together some FAQs, which we'll be sharing on our blog. So we will link that as well in the follow-up email. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank Ceri for being our speaker today. I'm sure you'll all agree she's been brilliant and offered some really great ideas. Thank you to Tamsin and Emma as well for being on hand to support our participants. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope that it's been a useful session for you all. Okay, and then I guess all there is to say is thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you again to Ceri, Tamsin and Emma. And we hope you enjoyed this session and found it really useful. So thank you very much. I'm now going to
Thank you, Laura.
end the webinar. Thank you, Ceri.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.